Good evening and welcome to MetroFocus. I'm Jenna Flanagan. Pet lovers across New York are celebrating a new bill recently signed into law by Governor Hochul that protects animal rights. The law, which takes effect in 2024, will ban the sale of dogs, cats, and rabbits at pet stores in New York and place restrictions on how many animals breeders are allowed to sell. Now, several other states already have pet sale bans in place, making New York just the latest to join the fight to end what is called the puppy mill to pet store pipeline and the animal abuse that often comes with it. And joining me now with details on this new law, as well as how it will affect animal enthusiasts and those in the pet sale business, is the Deputy Majority Leader of the New York State Senate, Michael Gianaris. Senator Gianaris is also the original sponsor of this bill. Senator, welcome to MetroFocus.
Thanks for having me on, Jenna.
Absolutely. So, first off, tell us, because I sort of touched on the fact that this isn't, of course, limiting people's ability to have access to pets, but what is exactly the purpose of this legislation?
Well, the purpose is to save animals and spare them the pain and the suffering that they go through at the places where they originate. Uh, we call this the puppy mill to pet store pipeline because when you walk past the pet store on a main road in your neighborhood, you see the puppies dancing in the window, and you don't know where they came from or how they got there. But what we do know from doing the research and seeing the data is that predominantly they come from puppy mills, often out of state, where these animals are essentially treated like commodities. The females that are able to give birth are just utilized over and over again. The babies are kept in cages, mistreated. We've seen instances where females, dogs that were no longer capable of giving birth were just shot, executed on site because the people who run these awful puppy mills don't look at these beings as living things. They just look at them as a way to make money and mass produce them and send them out to the pet stores, which in effect launder the awful behavior of these puppy mills because the consumer doesn't know all this background material. Well, we do know it. And what we have done now is prohibited these sales to spare these animals going forward. People will still be able to get their animals. There's so many great animals in need of adoption and rescue. I have some myself, and I know a lot of other people do. And if people want a particular breed or have specific desires, the law will still allow them to deal directly with a breeder that the consumer would have to go visit, lay eyes on the facility, and see for themselves that the animals are not being mistreated. So we still have options for people who want to get a pet in different ways. Just the pet store itself will not be among them.
So, when in the intro, I also mentioned that New York is joining several other states that also have similar bans in place. But I'm wondering, first of all, if it's only some states, not all states, then you can still get a pet from a puppy mill. That would be A. And then B, if something this terrible is happening, why is it not banned at a national level?
Well, the federal government has fallen down on the job, as they do in so many things. In theory, the federal government is regulating these puppy mills. They're supposed to, Department of Agriculture is supposed to go there, license them, fine them for violations, et cetera. But they just don't do it. They don't have the resources. They haven't made it a priority. Whatever the reason is, the federal government is just not doing it. And because so many of them are out of state, some have asked, why didn't we just go attack the puppy mills directly instead of retail stores? But because they're out of state, they're out of our jurisdiction. And so what we can do is cut off the demand for these animals at the retail shop level, which are predominantly where they're purchased, who makes the purchases from the puppy mill. And so we tackle the problem that way. Other states have done this. They've done it in kind of their own different ways. And I think it's a pretty effective way to both encourage adoptions. You know, in the animal rights community, there's a saying, adopt, don't shop, which is meant to encourage people to rescue animals that are wonderful, wonderful animals in their own right, and discourage people from shopping in a way that encourages the puppy mills to keep producing.
Well, again, because I do notice that you keep saying discourage. This doesn't necessarily eliminate. And I'm also wondering, I mean, for some people, perhaps they've got an idea that, at one point it was very popular after that movie 101 Dalmatians came out, and a lot of people wanted to get a Dalmatian. And if you really want to buy an animal, you can buy it, and it might be cheaper to get one from a puppy mill than it is to adopt. So can you just address the fact that how this discouraging works, even though it doesn't eliminate the problem?
Fundamentally, the assumption we're all making is that people, if they knew the hard conditions that these animals were being bred in, would choose not to do that. And so by requiring them to deal directly with the breeder, if they still want to use a breeder, the idea is you would see for yourself whether they're being treated humanely or whether they're just a large-scale mass production scheme for profit. The other thing to keep in mind is this is a measure that protects the consumers themselves because these animals, when they're bred inhumanely the way they are, often have health problems. And there's many, many occasions where people have purchased animals from a retail shop only to go home and realize they have to start paying thousands of dollars in veterinary bills because the animal has a defect, a genetic defect, or some kind of health problem that results in the need for a tremendous amount of care. Just to give you an example of how these shops have been not really focused on the well-being of the animal, the way they're thinking about these animals. We had one on Long Island that had an enforcement action brought against it by the Attorney General. It was shut down for a while. And part of the complaints were that they were selling sick animals. One of the people that bought it complained, and the pet shop owner's response was, well, if you buy an animal that's sick, we'll take it back and swap it out for another one, no problem. But these are not automobiles, or they're not cans of soup you buy on the supermarket shelf that can be exchanged for a better one if you don't like it. These are living things, and to treat them this way really underlines the problem that we're trying to solve here. And I think by cutting off the middleman or the launderer of the bad behavior, in this case at the retail store level, I think will go a long way towards improving things.
Well, we've also been, I mean, I myself, I mentioned, Dalmatians as a particular breed. And we have, of course, been talking about puppy mills, but this bill isn't just about dogs. It extends to cats and rabbits as well. Do you find the same problems with cat breeders and rabbit breeders?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the puppy mills are the most notorious, but yes, this occurs across the spectrum. That's why all three of those animals were included. They are the most common household pets as well, and so it made sense to include all of them. One other thing I would say, just from the business perspective too, because we've heard that as well, is the pet supply and store industry gets 98% of its revenue from things that are not selling of animals. Only 2% of the industry revenue comes from the actual sale of animals. It's mostly pet food, supplies, litter boxes, what have you, all the things that go into having a pet.
Costumes, yeah.
Right, exactly. Halloween time for sure. But the fact is, if these pet store owners just want to rethink their business model a little bit, they will survive just fine and won't have a real detrimental impact on their business. But we will be doing immeasurable good to thousands of animals that are currently being mistreated.
Okay, because I was going to ask if this could be seen as an anti-business bill, but you just explained that. I'm wondering though, I mean, dogs, cats, rabbits aren't the only creatures that you might see in a pet store. You can also find reptiles, you can find different breeds of birds. Should something like this extend to them as well, or is there not the same kind of problematic behavior when it comes to pet stores selling birds and reptiles?
Right. I mean, I'm not aware of an iguana mill that does the same kind of mistreatment that these other mills do. But if there is evidence of that, then I'm certainly open to having that conversation and moving forward. We've done a lot of good in New York since we've taken the Senate majority, interestingly enough, to protect animals. We're the first state in the country to ban cat declawing, which is an inhumane procedure. We've improved the standards for shelters. And this puppy mill, anti-puppy mill bill, is probably the flagship law that we've passed since that time to improve the lives of our loved ones, really, because that's what they are when they become members of our families. If there's more work to be done, we're ready to roll up our sleeves and keep doing it.
Well, speaking of more work to be done, this seems, at least based on what you described, like the kind of legislation that should be a slam dunk in Albany. But anyone who's paid any attention to Albany knows that's not necessarily a thing. So did you receive any pushback, and can you tell us what the reasoning was?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like you've asked some very good, informative questions in this interview, and I think a lot of legislators initially, when they hear about this, have the same questions. And so it did take some time to educate people. There are arguments about the businesses. There are arguments about people's choice and animal and the way they obtain an animal. But at root, what you find out once you dig into it is there is not a pet store in existence that sells animals that is not affected by the puppy mill industry and somehow encourages or purchases from them or encourages that procedure to keep going. And so it's funny, it passed in both houses by wide bipartisan margins. It almost never happens these days. Democrats and Republicans alike get together, but I guess saving puppies and kittens is the one issue that still brings everyone together. But it took a couple of years to get it done, but once you educate people, they all were supportive. I used to tell folks who were concerned about the businesses, give me the name of a store in your district, and they would, and we'd look up their records, and there was not a one that was not getting their animals from puppy mills that had horrible activities occurring as part of their production of animals. And so it didn't take too long once you get to that point to get everyone behind it. I'm glad the governor also agreed and signed it. So we're now one of the leading states in protecting our dogs and cats and rabbits.
Well, Senator, we're almost out of time here. We've got about a minute left, but with all this positive energy and cooperation that I'm hearing coming out of Albany, at least on this issue, is there anything else that you're working on that you would want to share with us that is at least seemingly moving towards the finish line?
Well, we just started our new session, so there's a lot to come in the next few months. But the creation of true affordable housing is something that is a priority for me. I know the governor's mentioned as well, so we'll see when she presents her budget what details she has in her proposal. Fixing the MTA and getting it on sound financial footing, not just year to year with the Band-Aid approach that we've been taking, but a real solid investment in our mass transit are two of the things I'll be looking at in the next couple of months as our session unfolds.
And of course, everything is interconnected. So how closely is Albany watching what does or does not happen in Washington when it comes to the debt ceiling?
A great deal. I mean, we're watching Washington for so many things, and we just had a fight over our highest court here in New York, our Court of Appeals. There's a chief judge nominee that we just rejected because the states and the state court system are becoming all the more important as our federal government, particularly the U.S. Supreme Court, is going backwards and pushing a lot of these decisions that we thought were protected federally back onto the states. So there's no question we're linked to whatever happens at the federal government, but we're ready to do our work here in New York.
All right. Well, Senator, I want to thank you so much for joining us on MetroFocus, definitely for fighting the good fight for animals. And please join us again with any updates on what's to come from Albany.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely.